Muy buenos días, buenas tardes a quienes se van conectando a nuestro webinar. Estamos esperando un par de minutos
Good
para
afternoon to those joining the webinar. We're waiting a few moments to get started, waiting for all the participants to connect. Perfect. I'm very glad to welcome every and each one of you who joins this online webinar organized by the Immigrant Network, San Franciscan Immigrant Network, about human treaty from the network. We have organized this seminar called Protecting Human Rights to Combat Human Trafficking. Before I get started and I start introducing the panelists, let me introduce myself. My name is Jaime Van Campos, Franciscan, and I was part of this immigrant Franciscan network. And now I am invited so I can join you in facilitating this seminar. So I'm very happy to be here next to you so that we can share a little bit on the experience of two amazing panelists that we have invited. I would love to share with you the instructions for interpretation, simultaneous interpretation. So if you look, there's a globe. Do click there, it says interpretation, and select the language that you want to listen. Spanish or English. Is important for everyone to select a language that you prefer so that you can listen the seminar when it's being interpreted simultaneously. For those of you who speak English, the instructions are as follows.
If you're using a Mac or a PC, you can click the controls and click on interpretation. It's the little globe. You can click the language that you would like to hear. And if you only want to hear the interpreted language, you'll click mute original audio. That way you don't hear both happening simultaneously. If you're using a smartphone, you'll tap more, and then you'll tap language interpretation, the little globe, and if that's what you have on your phone, and then you'll tap the language you would like to hear, and it's the same process if you'd like to mute the original audio, and then click done.
Thank you, Lori. I want to now share who is gonna be with us this Saturday. We have Mary Snyder, is as Franciscan Mission Service lay missionary, currently serving on the US-Mexico border. She has worked in human trafficking prevention and direct support to trafficking survivors for many, many years. So in this direct support, that's very, very important. She's done this work for more than a decade. In her experience as Vice President of Social Responsibility of Marriott International, she led a team that developed a human trafficking training program for its hotel associate, which was provided in kind to the global hospitality industry and academia in multiple languages. In 2019, she joined the Safe Center for Survivors of Human Trafficking at the University of Maryland to create a new customer service. She works one-on-one with trafficking survivors and through partnerships and grants, providing information, training, free education. Currently, she works, as we were saying, in the border between the US and Mexico. Also, in this morning, we have Jose Barjau, a lawyer, degree from the University of Juárez Autónoma de Tabasco, Mexico. During 2019, he worked as a private secretary of the Federal Public Defender. He's very young, so his work experience starts in 2019. In 2021, he joined 72 Hogar Refugio for immigrants in Tabasco State. And since January 2022, he assumes the coordination of human rights and migration management of La 72. As of September of 2022, he is General Counsel for Representation of La 72 in matters of accompanied minors and strategic litigation. So I cordially welcome both. And from now, I thank them for their presence and for their testimony that they're going to share with us. Of course, we say hello to all of us who have been connecting from different countries. I see some people say hello to my Franciscan friends, those of you who join us in this webinar. More than anything, I would love to ask a general question so that you can share from what you have been working. You are advocates of human rights. So my initial question, based on your experience in working in this area of human traffic under your country's policies, right? So the question is, what can you share in regards to your experience working against human trafficking? Mary, maybe you want to start.
Muchas gracias and many thanks, Jaime. Hello, everyone. It's very good to be among all of you human rights defenders this morning. So I was curious about the country policy that would be stated by the United States and went on the US State Department website. It provided a very simple summary stating, quote, "The United States government follows the 3P, as in Paulo, paradigm: prosecution, protection, and prevention to combat human trafficking worldwide." But they emphasize a fourth P, partnership, to enlist all sectors of society in the fight against human trafficking. And it's in that context where I'll begin, because of course, business is one of those sectors. For the latter half of my 17 years with Marriott as its global vice president for social responsibility, which included sustainability, volunteerism, associate engagement, various issues and programs, but certainly human rights and specifically prevention of trafficking. Prevention and partnership were two of the foundational concepts for our anti-trafficking work. We worked with competitors, industry associations, and nonprofits in the US and globally. Our most impactful prevention contribution was worldwide human trafficking awareness training for Marriott associates, another word for employees, which was developed by PACT, formerly known as ECPAT to my fellow Americans, and Polaris, our partners. We made this training available in multiple languages and free to the industry and academia. And here are its results. Since rollout in 2016, 1.1 million Marriott employees, largely in the front lines of the hotels, are now trained to spot the signs and respond to human trafficking. And more than 900,000 hospitality professionals outside of Marriott in other companies or academia or universities who may be becoming hospitality associates in the future have also completed the donated version of the training. In the spring of 2019, I joined the University of Maryland Safe Center for Human Trafficking Survivors. I was excited to build the new economic empowerment service from the ground up, quickly for our survivors. Here again, partners were critical. We needed to stand up simple core programs while working one-to-one with survivors to build the lives that they wanted. I first turned to the University of Maryland, whom I began calling Mother Maryland. The university had a lot of what our survivors needed: free online English language training, free online series for simple money matters, free tax preparation through the Smith School of Business, and the students that worked for putting the tax returns together for our survivors. This last service, I learned, was welcomed by our immigration lawyers who were working diligently over months, sometimes years, to show our clients' readiness and commitment to becoming American citizens. When COVID struck, we secured grants for free laptops shipped directly to survivors and provided online training, allowing for a connection for them to have when we were all isolating at home. And we began establishing programs with employers. And that's when Marriott came back into my life. In the time since I'd left, Marriott co-developed another training program, this one for survivors. Trafficking survivors, as you all well know, face many barriers in their search for education and employment. The Future in Training curriculum, otherwise known as FIT for short, addresses that. It was a collaboration with the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery in 2018. It was designed with input from survivor consultants and field experts so that the FIT curriculum would provide trauma-informed job readiness training for survivors. The training program consists of 7 modules that focus on hospitality, yet teach foundational knowledge useful in any industry, including presentation skills, teamwork, time management, relationship building, and interviewing basics. The Safe Center, whom I was working for now, was the test pilot, with our first training 2 years ago this very month. In the meantime, they've now trained, along with others, 60 survivors. But the first class that my team and I helped train were just 3 survivors within about a month's time. The Safe Center to begin my formation and my 2 years in service at the border with FMS, the Franciscan Mission Service. But I do, before I hand it back over to Jaime, I do want to fast forward to today. Well, Thursday. In an announcement this past week, we received really good news, and that is that Marriott International and the Marriott family announced a $550,000 donation to the American Hotel and Lodging Association's Industry Survivor Support Program, with support for the Safe Center, my latest employer, to roll this training out nationally. They were selected to be the one to roll it out nationally so that more survivors can be trained. So SAFE is ready to train more survivors, and Marriott is ready to hire them. I hope this helps show the meaningful purpose, prevention, protection, and empowerment that can be provided to survivors, especially when done in partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for your experience. And without a doubt, this allows us to have a larger scope of the hotel industry and the lodging industry that probably many of us who are here connected today didn't have that insight. We haven't thought about it that way. I think that this is a vanguard project that focuses on an extensive field. As you said, there's a large amount of workers that have trained with you and your programs. And I think that is the proper place where we can talk about preventing human trafficking. That will be hotels. So thank you very much for everything that you have shared with us. And now I would like to give the floor to Jose. And after that, we can continue talking about some of the ideas that you have talked about. And I do have a few questions for you. But before this, I would like for us to be able to hear Jose's experience in his job on the other side of the border, the southern border of Mexico in the state of Tabasco. He is a lawyer, as I said before, and he is the general lawyer or attorney of the La 72, a refugee house for migrants. So based on your experience, Jose, I would like for you to share with us what are your takes and how much you focus on defending human rights in the southern part of Mexico. You have the floor now. Thank you very much. Before anything, I would like to thank all of you for the opportunity to participate and to express my experience, to share my experience. I'm very young, but I've been able to analyze this situation profoundly. Now, going to the matter, first, I would like to start with the current situation that we can observe here in the southern border, in the Tabasco region. Human trafficking here has become normalized. And why is that? Well, in Article 13th of the General Law for Human Trafficking, it states that the people who take advantage of the vulnerability of other people take advantage for sexual means. See, Mexico is a transition country. There are many underage children who are not accompanied, a lot of girls that fall in prostitution, or they have the need to fall into prostitution, coerced by criminal organizations. And this has been identified by the testimony of some people who have been courageous enough to talk. But that situation of financial vulnerability and the social disadvantages when they go into a foreign country, this leads for underage children and adolescents to become victims of human trafficking because of their own necessities. And different authorities in the state and also the prosecutor's office do not take that situation into account because they do not understand how that human trafficking takes place. Once I saw a case where they said the prostitution is something that they decide to do, but in the end, the live does not understand that the situation that affects these underage girls is due to the lack of proper conditions to live. So this make them more vulnerable to fall into these conditions. Instead of giving them support or training or being able to have access to a home, that's what we are trying to do in our shelter. We try to identify and give psychological support to these girls so that they don't decide to go into prostitution, even though they see this as a job. This is going to affect them psychologically, because this becomes something that's normalized, and that's what I want to focus on, because this becomes normalized, because that's not human trafficking for them. It's their job. That's the job that they want to do. So I had the experience of a person that went into prostitution, and then she wanted to leave, but the people that controlled that activity, since it was very profitable for them, they even used physical force to keep her. So she arrived to the shelter. She was crying. We activated a protocol that we have. But the most vulnerable people that are in the southern part of Mexico are the people that are mostly affected by this crime would be young women, especially adolescents, teenagers, who arrive alone, and the criminal groups take advantage of them. And I don't want to. Mostly the Jalisco cartel is the one who's focused on doing these. That's why the investigation of these types of crimes have just fallen into numbers. But the authorities have not investigated and sanctioned these crimes. So what can we do about this? As member of La 72, I'm a person that doesn't have the financial means or the help of the government or even a institutional structure to be able to give support to 100% of the victims. What we mostly do is that once we identify a person, we give them shelter in a safe place in the house. After that, we try to get a psychologist who comes from a light organization or even from our own shelter. This work can take place even a Sunday or at midnight. So we always have to look for someone who gives us this psychological support in an immediate way. Once the person is tranquilized, the psychologist talks with her to collect information. After this, we carry out an investigation like the police does, but in a very, but we're very careful when we do this. We try to get the phone number of the person. We try to get identification of the people. And we try to look for more people that can be affected by this situation. And what do we do with that information? Depending on what the victim wants. That's something that I would like to outline. There are many crimes that are not denounced because the victims do not want to do it because they are afraid. Since they are flying away from the context in their countries, mostly from Central America, where they denounce something to the police and they get murdered. So the families are afraid that the system in Mexico might do the same thing. And it does happen. Criminal organizations have a lot of capacity to look for people and to harass witnesses. There's a lot of information of people that have denounced these organizations and they failed. And that information, if the victim decides to denounce, we draft the complaint, a written complaint. We send it to the prosecutor's office in the city of Villahermosa. They come from Villahermosa, Tabasco, which is the capital of the country. They write down the testimonial of the victim presentially, and they try to do a written a drawn identification of the person. After that, they ask for an audience in an anticipated test, and that anticipated test means that they ask the judge to take the declaration from the victim without the people that are being denounced to be present. That's why they do it in anticipation.
So the system re-victimizes. So it almost happens 3 times. And this causes for the survivor or the victim in this process of repairing the harm done is tired, exhausted of reliving the trauma, telling the stories. And that's when we need a lot of emotional, psychological support so that things are in good spirit, so that the person can be in a good state. So what happens when we don't denounce? What happens? This information, when we don't file a complaint, this information goes into a data bank, and that information is there. This is something that the DA should do. They should have a map of where all these things are happening, but they don't do this. So once we have this information, we proceed to do anonymous complaints to federal entities, because this is the duty of the federal government, of the federal authorities, to follow up in these human trafficking issues. We do this via email or telephone in places where they can't locate where I am. So sometimes this looks like a movie. Everything has to be done strategically, because in a system that is so corrupted, from the beginning of the investigation, we have to take extreme measurements, since as organizations, we are the first contact with the population. And in being the first contact, we know very well the context, and this allows us to get this information and give the right use to the information. In my experience, I think that the main form of combating human trafficking is in collaborations with other organizations that start forming. For instance, we form a part, La 72, of different networks, all the way from Honduras to Mexico, right? And in these networks, we have with La Pastoral de Mobiliario Urbana, and they are in charge of detecting and giving information about human trafficking. And then they channelize these cases here in 72 or in Tamapula, Chiapas, they do this to give a follow-up, and that they come into Mexico safely, because the main way of capturing the victims is through the process of crossing the border safely. This is the main way in which they detect their victims. And how can we avoid this? It's with providing education, information, and an entry to Mexico in a safe manner. This is the data that we have tells us that this is the main way in which they capture the victims. So the reality is very frustrating, because we wish we could do more. We're limited to our capacity, to the limit of our capacity, but the solution is to become more strategic every time, use the information that we have, making it visible to other organizations, including the government, and in this way advance. That's all for me. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jose. I think in what you said at the end, how can we work in this, and your point of view, or what you mentioned about support networks. So I would love to share with the theme of this year, of this International Day of Human Treatment. The logo or the slogan says, getting to all the survivors with leaving no one behind. And from the experience that you shared and Mary shared, we talk about this issue, this great issue of human trafficking. That is one of the main businesses worldwide, illicit, illegal. So how do we treat it? How do we face it? And this means being in many places at the same time. And we know we cannot do that, except through the work that we can do via collaborations with networks. And we've heard Mary coming from the point of the awareness of the training and the accompanying or support. And you shared another side of this very diverse and very complicated, which is direct support to the victims that come to La 72. And you also mentioned safety issues. So in front of the, or because of the vulnerability of people, human trafficking happens. People who do not have the capacity to travel freely through the country or crossing borders, they fall victim of human trafficking. I would also love to share some data. Did you know that in 2020, which was the last measured, it actually, the number of victims that were detected reduced the human trafficking by 11%. So it feels that the work against human trafficking has worked. Male victims have increased 3%. Also, it is the smallest group. The women and girls are the biggest group, but it is also the male group is increasing. And why is this? Why? Because the intention of human trafficking is also, it's not just for human for sexual exploitation, but now it's also for work exploitation. So for forced labor in 2020, it was the same that it was with sexual means or with sexual intention. So this phenomenon, it's growing. It's also changing a little bit the way or the form of exploitation. And I wanted to ask you, based on your experience with this very diverse phenomenon, I wanted to start by asking Mari, from your experience, from your training, why did you think of working with hotels? Why training this hotel staff, and why go to academia, right? To universities, these two areas? Maybe the answer is obvious, but I would love to hear why this decision to have as a target the hospitality industry and the academia university.
Mhm. Well, for me, it was I had just moved to the Washington, D.C. area, and the hotel industry is a sizable one in the Washington area. I had known about Marriott, admired the company, had great brands, and so I was delighted to make a transition from another company to Marriott, as would be evidenced by the fact that I stayed there for 17 years. But you know, I had a dream job. A lot of people would ask me, you know, how to get into this workspace, because it was working in business, but it was working on social issues that impacted the global community. And then for me, I think I just needed a career shift. I needed new energy, and I believe in passing on the torch. And so I wanted to try something new and build something. And I liked the consistency of staying with this particular issue and this particular community who I didn't really get the chance to work one-to-one with. So the University of Maryland, I loved that the woman who founded the organization was in, you know, a former administration. She was in trade. I thought she was brilliant in working with a university system to build this. And I really enjoyed working with a dynamic and fast-growing nonprofit. And I learned a lot from working one-to-one with survivors. I'm sure we'll get into that soon. But I think what I could say is, you know, working directly with the survivors, you feel like you learn and can continue to grow in your experience and your support for them. But I really appreciated the size and scale of my former employer and feeling like we were able to help, you know, 2 million eyes out in the world, not just when they're working in the hotels, whether it's ours or someone else's, but that they can be, you know, seeing things and educating others when they are, you know, traveling, when they are going to church, when they are at community events with their families, in schools. So I think that, you know, big business can, I know there's some may see it as a mixed bag, and it is, everything is, right? But there was a lot of size and scale that you can feel for an issue that is often not wanting to be discussed, kind of hidden underground, hard to talk about, hard to know how to move people through in their recovery.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your answer. And I admire this work. I think it's innovating and very wide vision to detect everything. I think that in hotels, it is possible to become better at hearing and detecting what's happening. And I think for us that we work in this field of migration, which is the place where more possibility to generate the human traffic, and it's this challenge of being aware, like Jose was saying, is this issue of normalizing based on the work of sexual exploitation almost becomes an alternative. Like that made them wonder, could that become a normal way of income? That's what I understood, Jose, if I get that right. So how do you think, Jose? I ask you a question, and of course I invite those who are participating. If they have questions, you can go to the Q&A that is available for your question. Jose, what alternatives do you see concretely in the Southeast with everything that means the entry of the people to the country, and that their maybe goals are not staying, maybe they're just a pass through? Do you see possible to relate this problem? Because it is a problem, it is a need of employment, like Mari was saying.
The hotel industry also had the option to hire survivors from human trafficking. Do you think that this could happen in the Southeast? Trying to be able to look for or show via the industry or via companies, probably, can we try and look for possibilities to have job offers in order to accompany this process that you say that on the one hand, the victims, while being vulnerable, they ask themselves if this could be a feasible option. When they're right there, then all the violence comes, the retention and also the contention by you. How do you see that there's also a way that could help? As the Pope Francisco said, how can we promote and integrate migrants in the southeast of Mexico? The most effective solution, I would say, is for the migration entities should have facilitate. I've been here for 2 years and I've seen people who have stayed 6 to 7 months waiting for their process. And I've seen that transformation that happens once they arrive until they leave. Either they're going up or they're going back to their countries. It is a very harmful transformation. Why? Because they live under inhumane conditions. They don't have access to proper food. They're discriminated by the local populace, and they become cheap labor. And this is what generates the negative conditions so that they can become an easier prey by criminal organizations. When someone stays here for a long time, even the people change a lot. They start to wear. I've had people that, why they're not 100% in the shelter, because in the shelter we have limited resources. Sometimes we have to give up to 600 dishes, and the migrating population could be almost like 4,000 people. So we do not have the capacity. It's not the same in Tapachulas, but in Tapachulas, they use emergency mechanisms. They issue temporary permits that they give in 2 or 3 days so that people can continue advancing to their own destination. So this doesn't allow for people to stay there stagnated. And in terms of underage individuals, we do require integral attention for these young people, because the least does not have the resources. They don't have a place to put them in, or activities or anything. With the current well-being program or programa de bienestar, they give activities to foreigners. The federal government does this, and this opened a space for them to get a safe job for 4 months. The problem is that they only have 50 spots open for that. 50, only 50. So it's more of a political and legal problem. The government has to become a lot more swift in terms of migration policies. For example, they issued a communication where they allowed to the people who applied for the process to go into the US in CV1, migration allows for these people to continue their route. So they do not stay here. I think that migration authorities, instead of protecting or guaranteeing human rights, they violate them with the intention to do business with this, because that's the reality. The idea is to have a migration mechanism that allows for the people to advance, not to accumulate, because the more people stay in this place, they saturate the services, and that's when they look for other alternatives where they become more vulnerable to fall into those endless loops of suffering. Yeah, thank you, Jose. I'm reading some questions and some comments here that they're writing in the Q&A box. They were asking about the information that I saw from the year 2020. They asked if we had more updated information. And we have the reports from the United Nations of human trafficking for the year 2022, from 2022. I'm going to share those reports. We have the report in English and in Spanish, so I'm going to share the links, and there you can find the information. I just send it in the chat box. And there you can download the information, a more updated version. The information that I gave was the last report in terms of reports that have been filed or denounces. I would like to greet everyone who's connected right now. I know that we have people from the United States, from Mexico, Guatemala, Panama. And Rosario Martinez is writing from Guatemala. And she's asking about the possibility of working in coordination with police authorities or to do training courses on this topic. They say that in Guatemala, they don't have enough training for this, and the Secretary of Violence and Human Trafficking do not have enough scope. So Rosario is thinking about what Mari has shared about the training courses. So this is a question about how to generate training processes beyond what has already been done. And be more direct, Mary. It's possible that based on your experience, we can generate a training course for the people that are interested to do this in other countries and that want to become part of the network. I think that this could be a question for you. Do we have that possibility? And I would also like to talk about another comment here from Vivian. And she states that she thinks it's very valuable to get support from the hotel and lodging industry for all this prevention efforts and for the training and the identification of human trafficking. It's also new for her. She didn't know that the survivors of human trafficking could also find jobs there. So I think that based on the experience that you've shared with us by the members of the Franciscan Network for Migrants, how can we articulate based on the experience that you have in terms of training? We have to learn how to detect and give a companionment to the victims.
Mhm.
Mari, the floor is yours. If you want to say something, if we can possibly replicate something in other countries. So you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Jaime. Yes, the online training that I referenced is available and it's free. And now it's geared towards the hospitality industry, but of course, with any training, there's a lot of commonality information that is shared and given, such as, the indicators of human trafficking, the signs of sex trafficking, what to do in the situation. That could be a helpful start for our friend in Guatemala who's talking about educating the police. So that, and I can put this in the chat. The online training is at We Are Pact, WEAREPACT.org/for-professionals. I'll put that in chat. There are other industries, though, that have created this kind of training, and often it is available in both English and Spanish. So you might just, a good search, especially with those organizations that would be geared towards law and prevention, would be helpful, might prove fruitful.
Thank you very much, Mary, for your answer and for offering this information and sharing the links. Laura told me that we can send this information to all the participants via email, your link, and also the Global Report of Human Trafficking published by the UN. We already shared it, but we can also share with you in a PDF format. We have another question from Mary. The experience that Chief shared has been very revealing for a lot of us. So in terms of numbers, I don't know if you have information about this, but they're asking about the number of cases of human trafficking that they have in Marriott. Do you know that? Or are there hotels that are blacklisted, or the motels that are usually used by traffickers because their fees are very low? Can you tell us something about this?
I do not have those numbers. I haven't worked for Marriott for about 7 years now. And, but it, there, generally speaking, numbers tend to be, collected as an industry or a percentage by many organizations. Yeah, unfortunately, incidences happen at many chains or brands, whether they are high reputation or budget hotels. It can happen in a number of places, as we all know. But in terms of blacklisting hotels, I would tell you that, there's we have a loss prevention team, what was called loss prevention at one time. Loss is kind of more like safety, security, and loss prevention. And that corporate global group certainly tracks where many situations may be occurring, where hotels are not performing up to brand, where hotels may not have yet provided training. And of course, our model in the hotel industry is that we are an owner manager. So we often franchise hotels that are owned by other people. So they get our brand programs, our reward system, our standards that they must fulfill, but there's another entity in that mix. So, I would just tell you that internally, we are certainly tracking and aware, and then respond accordingly to help that hotel come up to its standards. And if it doesn't, generally speaking, a hotel will, has the potential for going on a green, yellow, red system, where the brand or the flag and its performance would be considered for non-performance. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Maria, for your answer. I think that the question about the numbers, everything related to numbers is very hard because these are things that aren't filed or reported completely. So these are mostly estimations. And sometimes on these estimations, you have to add the people who do not file reports because there are questions about the numbers. And I would like to ask Jose, there's another question for him. These are two questions because they have to do with numbers too. So first of all, Jose, he is asking if they know what is the percentage of prosecution and laws in Mexico against traffickers. So that's the first question. And then there's another question. Are there real numbers about the number of people that have been trafficked in the border? I think that this can be like a personal opinion mostly. And finally, in addition to the numbers from the United Nations, do you know other institutions that are monitoring the numbers of human trafficking?
Regarding the first question, in fact, I do have that information. In 2022, there were 3 files for investigation at a federal level, statewide 798. So we don't know exactly how many people were involved because these are organized crime, high impact, but this is the number of files that got started in 2022. Obviously, this number is low. In 2021, 35 at federal level, and at state 621. In 2020, we had 55 files were started at a federal, and 50 the research file. So it changes when they open a file to actually treat the situation. So in 2022, there were 840 formal complaints. So in total, state and federal. So there's a big division. And the formal complaint doesn't really happen. Only there's a statistic done by civil organizations. Regarding the second question, in my opinion, I think that we're not taking the information appropriately or correctly. I am a witness of how many people suffer this, and the situation sometimes get normalized, and because of enforcement of the authorities, we cannot do a proper investigation except human people responding like me against a whole system or something like that. For me, I'm surprised by the statistics that come from the because UN, sorry, because I have never taken the time of how a field study or the organization that are involved. These are only tentative information of what the Mexican government does, but they have never bothered to have a person come and interview the interested parties, not even the victim. So they've never come to 72 and say, hey, give me your data. Never. So this is the part that we need to contribute with this information through safekeeping the information and writing about it so that we can bring awareness about the situation. I don't know if that answers the question. No, I think pretty much you have answered the question from your point of view. Like you said, there isn't they don't collect the data. That is always the challenge, right? Like when we think, what can we do? I think that is part of our work. If the United Nations is not doing it, sometimes we have to do it through volunteers, workers, religious people. This is the work directly on the field. We're going to be finishing. We have gone over a few minutes in this online celebration, in the celebration of this important day, the immigrant network, the Franciscan Network for Immigrants it's celebrating this. This is very, very important that we talk about this. This information is to be spoken about. It's very important to collect the data. All the information that comes out about the data doesn't end here. We need to continue working. We need to continue finding answers within the network, within other organizations. But to end, I want to give each of you, Mari and Jose, 1 minute to 2 minutes to leave a message, a takeaway, if you will, from your experience of how you felt in this space of reflection where people from different countries participate that are working in their territories, particularly in the area of immigration and forced displacement. So some final words. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Jaime and Jose, and everyone for listening and asking some great questions. I think there's a lot of reason for hope, and I guess many of the survivors I worked with, their faces come to mind, and what they taught me are things that I feel like I've used at the border quite a bit. I think it's great that we're talking about the issue more, that COVID may have created a more empathetic, opening, and flexible workplace for survivors to work in. I also would say that I've read recently where empathy is one of the best skills to have in today's workplace. And that gives me hope for a more amenable, doable place for survivors to be. I also would say that the Franciscans have a set of values that can be very great guideposts on how to connect and purposefully work with survivors, to be present, to provide peace to them, to be humble and letting them take control of a situation or a conversation and guide you, to be simple because trauma can frazzle the brain, and to be joyful. And to give them a celebration of what they have accomplished and survived so that they have strength to carry on in their journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mari, for your words that brings hope from your work and to the Franciscan family, because it is important to know that it is possible, that from the basis, that from the work of the networks, we can do something. It is a situation, it is a big, big issue, but there is always something that we can do as Christian in help or in collaboration or in order to help our brothers and sisters. Jose, your takeaway from those that are here with us this morning, afternoon, depending on where they are, that have followed or that have shared with us this seminar online. I would love to thank you and express my gratitude, of course, to Mari for her experience. And also I want to thank you, Jaime, for putting together this webinar. And as a final takeaway, I think we need to get out of our comfort zone, and we need to create these networks of collaborations so that it doesn't just stay here in this webinar, but that we bring this mission of creating these networks of protection of communication so that we can advance a safe transit, which to a certain degree exists, but we need to create mechanisms that have an impact in the immigration processes of regulations and of knowledge so that people don't fall prey of the lies of people that promise solutions. There are other ways of entering Mexico in a regular way without risking to suffer such an immense harm. So from La 72, we are happy and willing to share the information about the processes and in general of how to come to Mexico in a safe way. And that's why I invite you to not just stay here in the comment, but that we work from each of our places and that we get informed. And in this way, we can free the population of disorganized crime. Knowledge is power. Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you, Jose, for the challenge, for the conviction of the work that you do. And through you, I want to thank those volunteers, the staff from La 72 that work day to day, faces reality, and looks to build a more fair and fraternal world. I also want to thank those of you who have joined us, that have come with us to reflect. Those of you who have brought their comments, I want to thank everyone. I also want to have words of gratitude for the interpreters, for Christian and Murtado, that make possible for us to communicate in both languages. So thank you so much. Have a beautiful Saturday. And to your emails, you're also going to get the information that was shared during the questions and answers. So message of peace for all of you. Thank you.